Carolyn Doobie here. What's the play for today? Today, it's doilies on a gel press plate. I'm going to be playing around with these in two ways. One on top of existing prints and two right into an art journal. And when I'm putting it right into the art journal, I will explain to you whether you want to put the plate on the journal or the journal on the plate. So come check it all out. I'm going to start by taking the paper doily and putting it right on the plate. Now, one of the advantages of using the gel press plate to do this is that it's going to grab and hold that doily in place. So even when I'm putting the paint on it, nothing's going to wiggle and move around. This is a paper doily, and I'm about to put paint on top of it. And when you've got thin paper and you put something wet on top of it, I think you know what can probably happen. So that's why as I'm pulling the sprayer, notice how I'm pulling it out from the center. I'm trying to reduce the amount of wrinkling or moving around that the paper will do when it gets wet. And I'm just going to keep brayering over this until I've got an even coverage of paint over the entire thing. Now, once I get that, then I can gently pull up that paper doily. I'm doing it gently because I can use this over and over again, so I didn't want it to rip or tear. Now, when I take the pull, I could use a plain naked white piece of paper, or I can take a colored piece of paper. And that's what I'm going to do here. Now, before I got into gel printing, I would actually buy colored pieces of paper, but I don't anymore. What I simply do is roll out the paint color of my choice on the plate and I do solid colored prints. That way I have whatever color of paper that I need. And if I ever run out, I know that I can easily make more. I'm going to do a little peeking here to see if the paint is lifting off as much as I want it to. And I think I'm going to give it another moment or so here. May even just rub my hands on top of it. Not because it really makes it lift up that much faster, but it gives me something to do while I'm waiting. Because if I just look at it, well, it kind of feels like that watch pot that doesn't boil. Now that I've got one print made with that doily, can I use that doily over and over again? Yes, but there's something you want to keep in mind. So here's the doily I used, and where the black paint is, it's still damp paper. So that means it's going to tear more easily. And so I'm going to go to a dry part of the doily. Now it's obvious to see where it is on this one because it's the part without paint. Now, once you've used a doily a couple of times, it may be completely covered in paint. And to use it again, all you need to do is wait until it's dry. Once the paint on it's dry, then you can keep on using it. Now, this is only because of ripping and tearing. So for me, I find that I rip and tear things pretty easily if I'm working with thin, wet paper. So that's why I'll wait for it to dry. But if you've got a delicate touch or whatever doily you're using doesn't rip, then absolutely use it wet. Go for it. I'm pretty generous when it comes to using doilies. I'll use it, set it aside and let it dry, grab another one to use while that one's drying. And that's because they tend to come in packs of like 25 or 50 anytime I've bought them. This particular one I got in the grocery store at the aisle. It was just hanging there. I'm like, oh, total impulse purchase. And there were 25 in the package. So I've got plenty, which makes it easy for me to use one, set it aside, let it dry, and grab the next one. The shape of the doily and that yellow print that I had there got me thinking about a sunrise. So on this one, I'm loosely trying to create the vibe of a sunrise. So the sun just kind of peeking up over the corner of the page. Something that I did a little bit differently on this print than I did with the blue one is the amount of paint that I used. I used just a little bit less paint on this one, and it wasn't that it was a grand plan, it's just kind of what squirted out there. You might have noticed that I didn't spend as much time brayering things around, and that was partially because there just wasn't as much paint on this one. Now that is going to have an impact on how this print looks. Now I'm continuing to rub my hands around here just to keep myself busy while I'm waiting for that paint to set up so that I can grab a whole bunch of it when I lift up the paper. Now the plan for this print was to evoke sort of a sunrise kind of vibe. That was my intention. And when I looked at this with the amount of yellow coming through the black area, I realized this makes me think actually more of a sunset, the way when the sun is setting, that golden hue kind of goes over everything. Well, let's try two doilies on one print. So I've got one there on the top. That's the one I was using earlier. And then I've got this one from another day's play. So all that black paint on there, it's already completely and totally dry. So what I've got now are two dry doilies that I'm putting here on the plate. and I'm pressing them down to make sure that that plate has grabbed them so they will stay in place when I put the paint on. Now I'm going to be using this as the first layer of an art journal page. I'm going to build a background with this, and I'm going to print it directly into my journal. The journal that I'm going to be using, that spiral one up there, that is a Canson mixed media journal. And that's one of my go-to journals to use simply because I love the feel of the paper and I love that it's got a spiral binding. So I'm kind of laughing at myself here as I'm doing this because I sure do seem to be spending a lot of time braying that paint around, trying to get it just so. As if somehow this is for the queen. But no, this is just the beginning layer of an art journal page. So when you go and put this print in your journal, should you put the plate on the journal or the journal on the plate? Well, let me show you what happens when you put the journal on the plate. And by the way, neither one is right or wrong. It's whatever you prefer to do. So I'm pushing this down on top of the journal. And as I'm doing this, even though I think I'm putting even pressure everywhere, you're going to see exactly where I didn't get that pressure. And in fairness, I'm trying to push through an existing journal that has a bunch of pages done in it, so it's a little bit tougher to do. Anywhere where the paint didn't pull up as much, that's where I didn't have as much pressure. So I've got those white grungy areas. And by the way, if you want to create them, this is how you do it when you're printing directly in your journal. So let's say you don't want those grungy areas in it, you want the paint to fully transfer, then you'll find it easier if you put the plate on top of the journal. That way you can get that even pressure there everywhere so that all of your paint will transfer in one clear, crisp image. Well, now I want to add a little bit of color into the round areas of the doily where it's completely naked white paper. And to do that, I'm going to use a round gel press plate. Now this plate isn't the exact size of the center of the doily, but guess what? It doesn't have to be for this. I'm just going to use a little part of it. No one will ever know that they aren't actually perfectly precisely lined up in size. Now you might be wondering, Carolyn, it's just this easily paintable area. Why don't you just grab a paintbrush and fill it in that way? Well, what I found is when I've got some gel printing on the page and I come in with a paintbrush, it has a very different look. Now, it's not good or bad, it's just a different look. And I really want the color that I'm putting here on the doily to match the vibe of that black paint. When I'm at the end of a tube of paint, it is so easy for me to squirt out more paint than what I needed. It's also really hard for me when a paint tube is really full. I tend to squirt out a lot more paint than I want then too. So yeah, basically I've got a problem squirting out too much paint some days. But what's going to happen here is I'm spreading it around, I'm realizing it's just way more than what I want. So I'm going to grab something nearby and simply lift some of that paint up. And by the way, these paper doilies, when they get all colorful and used, they make wonderful things to add into the layers of your art journaling, your collage, your card making, whatever you're creating. But now I've got a nice thin layer on there as opposed to the super thick layer that I had a moment ago. And now I've got a start to this art journal page. Well, thanks so much for joining me for today's play with the doily here. If you've been enjoying this video, I'd so appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. And if you'd like more ways to use a gel press plate, hit the subscribe button. That way you'll know as soon as Gel Press has a new video out. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of your colorful journey.